Hi friends, my name is Angie, Angela, whatever you would like to call me, and I'm coming to you from Western Australia. There are a lot of new viewers this month, so welcome to you if you are new. Hello again if you have been here for a while. This is my YouTube channel where I share all about books in general. I share about my life with books, what I'm reading, what I want to read, bookish things all around. Every month I do a wrap up of the books that I have read for that entire month, and today is that video. So I'm going to share with you my current reads I have on the go still, and then the books that I finished this month. And as usual, it is a real smorgasbord of books. There is historical fiction, literary fiction, memoirs, fantasy, non-fiction. I really have the entire gamut. But before we get into the books, I wanted to mention a movie I watched, which was an adaptation of a book, and that was The Thursday Murder Club. Now, I have to confess, I did not finish The Thursday Murder Club. I thought that book was going to be right up my alley, but I found maybe it was too slow. It was a couple of years ago I tried to read it. I think it was too slow. The jumping from perspectives was a little bit jarring for me, and I could not get into it. The movie, however, I wouldn't say I loved the movie. It's a very, very light movie. Like, there's not a lot of depth to it, and I wonder if that's a reflection of the book. If you have read the book and you can compare the two, please let me know. What I did love was Helen Mirren's wardrobe. That was excellent grandma goals. And also the fact that their retirement home was like at Downton Abbey with these enormous apartments. I loved that. It was quite a feast for the eyes, but there wasn't a lot of meat on the bones, so to speak. Anyway, let's get into the books that I'm currently reading still this September. Okay, I am still reading Beartown by Fredrick Backman. This is my first Backman book. I picked it up, I think, in late July. And I've got to say, I feel like I'm halfway through, but Storygraph is telling me it's about 40% through, and not a lot has happened. I feel like there's a build-up coming, and you're probably like nodding if you've read this book, and I can feel where it's going, but it feels like I've just read setups and vignettes for the entire first half of the book, which is not really something I'm into. I do see that this is probably more character driven than perhaps plot driven, and I do find that a struggle sometimes. It depends on the book and on the author. So this is a little bit of a struggle, but I am persisting through because I really do want to read it. But generally, I just feel like I am halfway through this book and it hasn't really started. We'll see how I feel once I finish the book. Another one that is proving to be a slog is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. And this is not the book's fault. The problem I had was I got into the chapter which was called An Occult History of Britain, and that chapter was so long. That chapter was 100 pages, and it just became a bit of a slog. Again, I am finding it difficult with the way that Hilary Mantel has chosen to not call Cromwell when he is talking. I'm finding that difficult with the he said stuff. But I'm continuing on. There are little nuggets here and there that are keeping me engaged. And at the moment I'm probably a similar amount through, maybe 30% through. And there are definitely some moments of writing that are just really, really lovely, and I'm enjoying that. But yes, it's a little bit of a slog with just a lot of words and not a lot of action. So Wolf Hall is still going, and I will finish that. And then this is my little comic relief, if you like. This is Counting One's Blessings, the selected letters of the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth. It is really delightful. It's broken into 4 segments, which is Elizabeth when she was from a young girl up until a young woman. Then it is her as the Duchess of York after she has married Prince Albert. Then it goes into, and that's what I'm currently reading at the moment, and then it goes into the Queen itself. We know what is going to be coming, and I'm looking forward to reading those letters. And then it goes to the Queen Mother. And it's really, I would have loved to have lived in this time where letters were such an interesting way to communicate with people. There's so many letters that she wrote to people that are no one especially important to history, but there's someone that she may have met at a shooting party or at a ball, and then they just started corresponding with each other, and then it turned into these really funny, comic little tit for tat kind of letters, and I'm really enjoying it. Her writing is very humorous. She is a bit of a breath of fresh air, and I think that the monarchy appreciated that at the time she came in. The letters that she wrote in particular to King George V and Queen Mary were very endearing. She definitely, I think they loved having her as a daughter-in-law. And it's really, really interesting. I was surprised to find how often she was ill. She was a very poorly person. She was always catching the flu or some sort of illness. But she went to live on for a very, very long time, which is quite interesting. So this is my comic relief for the moment while I'm reading Wolf Hall and Beartown, which are proving to be a little bit of a slog. Now, as for the books that I actually finished, the first book I read, which got my month off to a brilliant start, was The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. Lawhon? This was first published in Australia in 2023, and this was the book that I felt I was watching everybody read last Christmas in the Northern Hemisphere. Everyone seemed to be reading it and everyone loved it. So I was excited to get my hands on it eventually. Now, I believe that Ariel Lawhon, I don't know how to pronounce her name. I believe she has a track record of finding stories of real women in history and creating a dialogue or a bit of fiction around their lives to try and piece it together. And she does it so well. I do have a few of her books that are on my virtual TBR that I would like to read, and if this is anything to go by, I will definitely pick them up, and she probably will be an auto pickup author in the future. The Frozen River is set in Maine, North America in 1789, and a man has been found entombed in ice, and Martha Ballard, who is a local midwife and healer, who is our protagonist, has been asked to come and identify the reasons for death. What is the cause of this man's death? However, Martha soon realises that this man has most definitely been murdered according to her medical knowledge, but he is also a man who has been accused of rape of a wife of a prominent member of the community just a few months prior. And the story is set over this very harsh winter in this location, and it becomes a book that really does transport you to another location. I really loved my time with Martha and her family and Martha's day-to-day life and just all the bits and pieces that came with her existence. I really enjoyed following along with that story, getting to know the townspeople, her friends, the people that were not her friends. And Martha finds herself in the middle of this scandal that really threatens herself, her family, and the townspeople in general. At face value, I thought this was just going to be historical fiction, but it is a thriller, it is a love story. It's very well paced, and it's a really interesting perspective of early America post-colonialism. Because this is set about 10 years since the independence of America as an independent nation separate to Great Britain. And so it's very interesting how they are still trying to find their feet and who they are as a nation at this point. So it was very fascinating to read about, but I did get major Outlander vibes as I was reading this. I haven't read the entire Outlander series. I've only read the first book, but I have watched all the seasons that are available, and it definitely did give me some major Outlander vibes. So I really loved that one. Then I read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and this is me continuing to try to find my fantasy jam. And so The Cruel Prince by Holly Black is a book that I would recommend to anyone that is just dipping their toe in the fantasy genre. When I picked up this book, it was one of those books that I was ready to cancel my plans to keep reading. It is very light in the sense that it is not a deep, heavy world-building, magic understanding, but it grips me straight away, and I really wanted to stay in it and find out what happened at the end. So The Cruel Prince opens with Jude and her siblings at home, and she witnesses the murder of her parents, and then that murderer steals away Jude and her siblings to live in the high court of the fairy, which is the world that he is from and that her mother had been in at some point. Then we are 10 years later, and Jude really wants nothing more than to fit into this world, even though she is mortal. They really do despise humans, but no one despises her more than Prince Carden, who is the youngest son of the king. Jude ultimately becomes really deeply embroiled in these palace intrigues as she takes on this secret mission. And she will risk her life and her siblings, her two sisters' lives, in order to save them and also the fairy world itself. The Cruel Prince is a really low-stakes fantasy, and it is very easy to settle into it. It has a lot of flaws, yes, but if you are looking for a book that you can read quickly and something to maybe be in between two heavier books, this is a really great one. I found the simplicity of it allowed me enough information to be immersed in the world while not overcomplicating things. So I was able to focus more on the characters and the plot, and I'm very much looking forward to picking up the second book, which is called The Wicked King. Now, at the start of August, I did a fancy-dancy TBR spinning wheel where I chose 6 books that I wanted to try and get a few under my belt during August. I read one, only one, and that one was The Butterfly Man by Heather Rose. And luckily, it was a real gem. I have not read Heather Rose before. She is an Australian author and she has a number of books in her back catalogue. She is quite famous for setting a lot of her books in Tasmania, which is where she is from. And I haven't read a ton set in Tasmania. But anyway, this is an interesting book because it takes inspiration from the real-life person named Lord Lucan, who was a British aristocrat who was accused, essentially found guilty without trial, of having murdered his nanny in 1974 and attempted to murder his wife. Then after that happened in real life, the nanny was murdered, his wife had been attacked, and then Lord Lucan disappeared and he was never seen again. So Rose imagines that Lord Lucan has found himself in Tasmania under a new identity of Henry Kennedy, who was a Scotsman, and he is just living a very quiet life in Tasmania, minding his own business. He has a partner named Lily. He has a very small group of friends until he finds that he has a brain tumour and it is inoperable and he is going to die from this, but it also risks everything for him because it starts to mess with his memories and he starts to slip a little bit in the things that he says, and he's worried that he's going to get caught out. I think from the synopsis, I expected a bit more of a thriller. I thought it was going to be something different. Instead, I found something a lot richer, a slow meditation on our identity, secrets, and how the past shapes us. And what was interesting is that I went in knowing that Lord Lucan was clearly the main character, but every single one of the other characters had something else that was in their past that they had to reconcile with in some way. Some had hidden histories of their own, and Rose really did a great job in allowing each of those characters to shine throughout the book, not just Lord Lucan or Henry Kennedy's perspective. Heather Rose's prose is really quite sparse, but very beautiful. It is not especially lyrical, but there is something very factual, and it's just one of those writers that writes something and makes you go, yes, that's exactly what that is. You know, there's no fluff around it. It is set, like I said, in Tasmania. It is specifically set on Mount Wellington, and Mount Wellington becomes its own character in its own right as we go through the seasons, and it's really quite a beautiful background. It's a little bit uncomfortable at times. I have to admit, a bit unnerving at how quiet it actually is. You really do feel like you're just coasting along, and then you realise that you've really started to get information that is quite revealing, and it's an interesting way that it's an interesting feeling that I had reading this book, and it is unnerving at times at how quiet it is. And I do think that perhaps it was a little bit too empathetic towards Lord Lucan, but that's what the story is, you know. It's beautifully written, it is thought-provoking, and I think it will stay with me for a long time. It is really, really incredible. I would give a fair warning that if you are someone who perhaps is a bit too close to watching someone come to the end of their life, you may want to give yourself a bit of space for this because the main character is going through that. I particularly found it quite beautiful and apt. I really did think that it was well done, but just a little bit of warning in case you are in a delicate space. And then since publishing The Butterfly Man, Heather Rose went on to write a book called The Museum of Modern Love, and that won the Stella Prize in 2017. I think I might have read it, or I tried to read it and didn't finish it. I do recall I'm not sure if it was The Museum of Modern Love or The History of Love. But anyway, I'm determined to pick up some more of Heather Rose's writing. I have another one on my shelf that she wrote called The River Wife, which I think is a bit more magical realism. So that one I think I want to read very soon. So Truman Capote is having a bit of a cultural moment right at this minute. And it is because of the latest Ryan Murphy offering of Feud, Capote's Swans, I think it's called. And it is based on the book Capote's Women. by Laurence Leamer, and I picked up this book in audio form this month to read. The book is supposed to be about Capote's decision to write a book that really was taking from the lives of these women that he had befriended. Throughout his life, he started to collect these women, these socialites, and he called them his swans. And these were people like Bay Paley and Lee Radziwill, the glamorous women of New York City in pre-war and post-war New York. And they were admired for their beauty and the style, and many of them were like at the top of the best dressed list. But they all had one thing in common, which was it was their goal, it was their ambition to marry well, which meant to marry rich. And Capote befriended them. He became a real confidant to them, and he kind of collected them like trophies. But then Capote decided that when he was going through a major writing block, he decided he was going to write a book which was very much based on these women's, and that book was called Answered Prayers. And he hoped that this would be his absolute masterpiece. And he published a few chapters in advance of finishing the book. He really wanted to just get a bit of momentum going because he hadn't written anything or published anything for a while. And after these chapters came out, it was unmistakable that they were definitely based on these women who were real life people and the scandals that they went through in their lives. And so he had this giant fallout with all of these women who were quite powerful. They were married to powerful men, and Capote betrayed them entirely and they exiled him. So through this book, it's almost like a bit of a mini biography of a number of women plus Truman Capote. And there were people, like I said, like Bay Paley and Lee Radziwill. There was also Pamela Churchill was another one who was an incredibly fascinating character in history. She was married to Winston Churchill's son, and she had she must have set some records for her love affairs. And there was one quote that came out of this book that had me laughing. I had to call my mum straight away. And it was a quote about her that said, "If Pamela Churchill had as many pricks coming out of her as went in her, she would be a porcupine." And I was like, ugh. I love that, mid-century wit where it is very indirect, but very much a play on words at times. Anyway, I want to read a little more about Pamela Churchill. I have had a book about her, I think called The Kingmaker, on my virtual TBR for a while, but I didn't really know much about her. So this was I got to know a bit more about her, and yes, I want to learn more. But back to this book, I think that it was a little uneven because it was really juggling almost 10 biographies in one book, Truman Capote, along with a number of these women, some that I had never heard of before. And I think it just meant that I really didn't get the story I thought I was. It was supposed to be about this betrayal that he had done and what had happened, and that really only came about in the last 30 pages or so of the book. So personally, I think if there was a tighter focus on just a few key players, like I think the TV series focuses on 4 women rather than all of the women, and I think that was probably a good decision. That would have made for a stronger narrative and to keep me engaged, I think, a little bit more. It did start to get a little bit tiresome. Then, at the last minute, at the start of the month, a friend of mine and I decided we were going to do a buddy read, and we did The Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. So I can't share my thoughts on this really at the moment, other than my friend knows that I did not love this book. I had a lot of thoughts about this book, and I will share them with you in the future, but I really want to have a proper debrief with my friend. But at some point, I sent her a message and I said, please tell me to keep going with this book. Is it worth it? Because she raced through it and she really enjoyed it, but I just struggled with a lot of things. And she was like, yes, finish it. And I'm glad I finished it. It is one of a duology. There is a second book that comes, but I don't know if I'll go into that. Anyway, I shared more than I planned to on this, so I will share this more with you later in the month or perhaps in my September wrap-up. And if you're not familiar with the story, I think this was Sue Lynn Tan's debut, and she has chosen to write stories that are based on Chinese myth and legend. And this is I think they call it like a mid-autumn legend. And so what it says is, inspired by the legend of Chang'e, the moon goddess, this captivating debut weaves Chinese mythology into a sweeping adventure of love and family, immortals and magic. The premise was really interesting, and I liked the fact that it was a retelling of something that I did not know anything about, so I'll share more about that later. So that was everything I read in August, which I don't know if it was my favourite month of reading. I had some good books, but it felt like a very flat month. Like I wasn't riding highs and lows as I went along on these journeys with these characters. It was just very, not a flat line, but it was just, I feel like I need a little bit more adventure. I have some books that I cannot wait to get to in September, but I will finish Beartown, I will finish Wolf Hall, and those are just taking a long time. Then I have some really fun ones I want to get into a bit later this month, because we are officially in spring. When you watch this, we are officially in spring now in Australia, and I am ready for it. So if I had to choose a favorite for the month, most definitely The Frozen River, followed by The Butterfly Man, for sure. But yes, there we go. So I hope this wasn't too long. I feel like this was a very wordy video, which, I mean, this is what I do. I talk at the camera. But I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know below what was your favorite book for the month of August? I would love to hear your thoughts. And maybe if you've read any of these and you align with my opinion, or perhaps you don't. I would love to hear either way. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you again soon. Have a wonderful week of reading ahead. Bye.